All right, so here we are. Let me just get this focus where I want it. Okay, so like I just said, you've read the book.
Yes.
We're now going to take the steps as they're presented in the big book and as they're described in this book. So,
All right. John, thank you.
oh, I'm glad we're doing this. I've been wanting to record this for a while. It's also good just to see you again.
Likewise.
So the introduction of the book just lays the foundation for how the steps really came to be. It talks about how Bill encountered his old friend Ebby in the hospital while he was still detoxing, still in very bad shape.
Right.
And Ebby took him through the steps much like they would become, based on the principles from the Oxford group and some other sources. He got Bill to understand that it was his incredible self-centered thinking that continued his alcoholism, feeling that he was very unique. And most importantly, Ebby impressed on Bill that if he was to stay sober, he needed to find other alcoholics like himself to help, and help in a direct way by taking them through the steps. That's the most important thing, and it's one of the things that's often lost. We've substituted kind of a generalized type of fellowship, hanging out at meetings, talking about our problems, as a substitute for doing the direct work, which, as in page 81, it says guarantees our sobriety. Nothing show ensures immunity from drinking, but intensive work with other alcoholics. And that means by taking people through the steps. So that being said, the first step, as it's laid out in the big book, as it describes very clearly, on page 30, paragraph 2, it states in the big book that we had to fully concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholics, and this pertains to all addictions too. You know, I've worked with drug addicts, food addicts, sex addicts, every type of addiction, any type of compulsive behavior. If you can admit the problem, that's the beginning, and it works for all of them. So we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholics. And it states very clearly, this is the first step in recovery. And notice it doesn't tell us that we should write endlessly about purposeless, powerlessness or unmanageability. Those are things that can catch many people because they can't admit that they're powerless over everything. And if you look at that clearly, it's just asking you to admit that you're powerless over alcohol, not that your whole life is unmanageable and you're powerless over everything. That just goes way beyond the intention of the 12 steps. So, that being said, Tope, do you concede to your innermost self that you're an alcoholic?
Yes.
Congratulations on taking the first step. I just shook Tope's hand, by the way, on the camera. So the second step, the caption to the steps as they're hanging up on the wall in most AA meetings, most 12-step meetings, describe the experience of taking the steps. It's not direction on how to take the steps. So in other words, step 2 is a good example of that. Step 2 states that came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That's describing the ongoing overall process of taking and developing the 12 steps in your life. Eventually, you come to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity. As it states in the big book, it was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more is required of me to make my beginning. That's pointing to the second step. So the question is, Toph, do you now believe, are you even willing to believe in a power greater than yourself?
Completely.
Congratulations on taking step 2. And notice how simple and direct this is. And remember that when Ebby took Bill through the steps and when Bill took many others, including Dr. Bob, through the steps, all it was a series of question and answers. So some people would say, well, where's all the writing involved in step 1 and step 2? In each step, there's no writing, as the original 12 steps were presented, in any steps except the 4th and the 10th step, and those are simple lists. There's nothing in here that says that we should endlessly describe what powerlessness or unmanageability. We should describe what God means to us. If you can describe God, you better keep looking, because that's not it. The only thing step 2 asks us, and that you just agreed to, is, are you willing to accept or believe in a power greater than yourself? That's all. And if you can state that simple statement, then you can move on to step 3. And notice that this is happening in a very simple, direct, and quick way.
Right.
We're dealing with very, very sick people in the beginning of their recovery, and it needs to be quick. It can't be complicated. Many, many people, especially when they're in early recovery, just the idea of sitting down at a desk and writing anything out is almost impossible to do. And it was never meant to be that way. It was a simple question and answer between someone who was sober and maybe newly sober, trying to stay sober by helping someone else going through that same process, a series of question and answers that basically qualify you and point you in the right direction. So now you've admitted that you're powerless over alcohol and drugs, et cetera, whatever you may be. You've admitted that you are willing to accept a higher power into your life. And now we're getting to step 3, making that firm commitment. So in the big book, step 3 is written as a prayer. And again, many people have difficulty with a Christian type prayer, and you may not, but some of the people you work with may. And that should not preclude them from taking the steps. And notice that we're only looking for a higher power. And that higher power can be any higher power that's greater than the lack of power that you have as an active alcoholic. So in that sense, even the 12 steps themselves are a power greater than yourself. And the reason why I say all this is, again, it shouldn't preclude people that have a difficulty accepting a supreme creator or Christian type God as a higher power. That shouldn't stop them from developing recovery. There's no reason for that. Sure. And our founders were very aware of that. Right. And so they used the word higher power rather than saying you must believe in Jesus Christ or you must believe in a Christian God. Any power greater than your using self is enough to establish your recovery. So that being said, a prayer is simply stating your intention that something happened. And the prayer that's in the big book, it is focused on a creator type God, and that's fine. But if you have difficulty with that, simply stating that your intention is now that a higher power guide and assist your recovery is enough to continue. So I ask everybody that I take through the steps, are you comfortable with saying a Christian prayer? And if not, I just ask them that simple question. So I'll ask you, are you comfortable saying the prayer that's in the big book?
Yes, I am. And I'm also comfortable saying other prayers.
So let's do it that way, but also with the understanding that as long as you can state your intention that a higher power guide and assist your recovery, you've taken step 3 as far as the original 12 steps were intended. But let's say the prayer. Do you know it by heart?
I know.
I should, but I don't. So God, I offer myself
to thee,
to build with me, and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, so that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Congratulations on taking the 3rd step. And again, remember that if you have a sponsee that doesn't like the prayer, you simply question, is it your intention that a higher power, even if it's the higher power of the 12 steps, guide and assist your recovery? Right. You've taken the 3rd step. So now we get to the 4th step, which is probably one of the most misunderstood and misapplied presentation of the 12 steps. Most 4-step presentations are very, very long. They're presented as a written narrative of your life, or at least a written drunkalogue. I've heard of some people that insist that there be 500 names on a 4-step list if you're even going to be thorough, and it doesn't mean anything of that. In the big book, it states very clearly that step 4 is nothing more than a list. And in describing his list, let me find the part where it says, in Bill's story, he describes taking the 4th step with Ebby was that he made a list of the people who he had hurt or toward whom I felt resentment. Very simple. A list, and it's a very detailed list. So we've added other things into the 4-step inventory that the big book mentions that we should be looking for. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry, and it qualifies that in a way. Where is it? At the end of the instructions for taking the fourth step, it says, where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? When we were at fault, what should we have done and said? We got this all down on paper, meaning we made a list. And behind me, you can see the inventory list. So this is the very, very close to the list that Dr. Bob used in taking over 15,000 people through the steps in his, 5,000 people in his 15 years of sobriety. The one thing that wasn't on the original 12-step list is procrastination, which was on Dr. Bob's list. Again, this is a near copy of what he used.
So a quick question with that.
Sure.
So in the big book when they direct about the 3 columns.
It doesn't say that in the big book.
It doesn't?
No. It doesn't say anything about the 3 columns. It simply tells you to list these. In fact, the third column regarding sex, the big book very clearly states that we treat sex like any other defect.
Right.
We don't treat it separately. So you notice that there's no category there for sex because the difficulties that we would have in our sexual relationships are the same as we would have in other relationships. It simply adds another layer. That whole idea of a 3-column list is not presented in the big book.
And that's a very popular way that people do that.
Yep. And it makes it much more complicated.
So Dr. Bob used a list very similar to this exact one in this format.
In the same format.
Wow.
And if you read the big book carefully, and it's hard to do that, even though you're reading the words, we're so influenced by other people that we see the words in that context rather than the clear context. And that's a good point. Nowhere does it say we create 3 columns. It simply states that we create a list of very specific character defects. And those are the character defects that are on that list. Again, to accommodate other teachings, we've put words where the words aren't. And we could read that, but for clarity, I mean, it's all in this book and it's all in the big book. So that's the list. The way to start the list. Let's do it on the board too.
Cool.
That's a fine way. I hope I can find this. So the way to do this, you can stay there. I'll use the list. We first just list the people that we come in contact with on a general basis, those people that are most important to us. And that's just to get the list going.
Right.
And then we ask ourselves, who have we been avoiding? They should be on the list. Who do we want walking in this room right now and looking in the eye? They should be on the list. And the same thing for institutions and businesses that we might owe money to or might have hurt along the way. And so and this list should be, it should be pretty concise. In other words, you don't want to list every person that you've ever had an argument with. That's just part of living in the world. And if you remember that the list is primarily for developing a clear look at your current patterns of behavior, a few people and a few institutions will do that. You want to get a look at your self-centered characteristics so that you can recognize them and abandon them. As it says in the big book, self-centeredness is the root of our trouble. That's what an inventory is to develop an understanding of our self-centeredness. So let's start to populate the list. I don't know if the camera's going to pick it up well or not, but
I think it would be worthwhile to mention I've done this a few times and my list has grown shorter over time.
Yeah. Again, I'm glad you pointed that out. This is what's going on right now.
Right.
But again, I would say for anybody, if your list is getting more than 1 page, you're making it much too complicated. If you've listed a handful of people, and especially the people that you've hurt as a result of your alcoholism and addictions, that's a long enough list. An ongoing 10-step inventory will bring up anything that you didn't remember or that you just aren't willing to face at this point. If you remember that what we're most interested in is establishing a way for individuals to maintain their sobriety while they heal.
Right.
The more complicated we make this, the more difficult that's going to be. We want to give people a strong foundation to build their recovery on, and that needs to happen as soon as possible. One of the reasons why there's a 2 or 3% recovery rate in AA and all the other A's worldwide, as opposed to the 70% when people did it this way, is it's much too complicated, and we don't get to people quick enough. We say, well, people are too sick in the first 90 days or the first year or 2 or 5 years, whatever arbitrary number we come up with. The 12 steps were meant to take before you even came to an AA meeting in the old days. And now it should be as soon as you come to AA, somebody should find you and take you through the steps if you're going to have strong recovery. So that being said, give me a few people you come in contact with on a daily basis, whether you have anything going on with them or not.
Okay. So Terry with an I.
One R?
2 R's.
Anyone else?
Casey. My mom.
Is there anyone even now that you're avoiding as a result of your, well, now it doesn't have to be as a result of your alcoholism?
Jesse. And Blockty.
How do you spell it?
BLACKTI.
Huh, I got a friend of mine named Bhakti.
So those are pretty much the ones that occupy space in my mind.
Okay, is there anyone that's not on this list now and that you have yet to make amends to that you hurt as a result of your alcoholism?
No, I've pretty much made amends to everybody else besides a couple of these people.
And are there any institutions, businesses, courts, IRS, anybody
Nope.
else that you? Good. Is there anybody else that you can think of that should be on this list?
No, not presently.
If you notice the bottom of the list, the higher self, higher power, self, and AA are also on the list, and that's important. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So starting with the beginning of the list, this is how you take people through the inventory. Starting with Terry, you simply ask the question, is there any resentment with Terry? Many people don't really understand what a resentment is. And there's in the book, there's a definition of terms where it describes resentment as a hostile, indignant, or contemptuous attitude that you're holding against someone. So a resentment is not necessarily you had an argument with someone and they got you upset and that's over with. That's not a resentment. But if you're holding something against that person, or even a situation that has developed, that's a resentment, something that is affecting the quality of your mind. And if you think about a resentment in that way, a hostile or indignant attitude, that person shouldn't have acted that way towards me is really what you're saying. That's a self-centered point of view. But simply life's common upsets is not a resentment. So another example that I often use is I still remember when I was 13 years old, I got called out by an umpire, and everybody knew he was a bad umpire.
Yeah. And
I screamed and hollered, and even at 13 years old, I cursed at him. And it was embarrassing to me and hurtful towards him. A day later, my dad told me, if you want to keep playing baseball, you got to go, and I know who he was, I knew how to get in contact. You have to go apologize to him. And it was a humbling experience, but it taught me how a resentment can really hurt me and other people at a very early age. And that's the kind of thing that we're looking for. Yeah. But I didn't put that down on my inventory list because it was long gone when I first did an inventory back in 1981. Right. So beginning with Terry, is there any resentment in your relationship with her now? So when there's a character defect shows, you put a check, and then you ask a question. What's the nature of the resentment? How does it arise?
So the specific situation?
Yep.
So she's the mother of my youngest child. We lived on the West Coast together. When I got sober 2.5 years ago, she moved back to the East Coast with our young child, and there's resentment there from that. You're
holding a hostile and indignant attitude towards her today.
I am today, and even though we're friends and we're developing warmth and connection and positive co-parenting and we've always been really good friends, but there still is that resentment underneath there. It's like you moved back to the East Coast with our child when I went to treatment, and now he doesn't have his dad in his life. There is that there. Yeah,
that's exactly what we're looking for too. And if you think about that could deeply affect your sobriety, and that's the point of this. If you get too stuck in it and you get too resentful, eventually you're going to look for some relief. That's the point anyway. So then the next question is, once you've identified the character defect and you've described it briefly, again, details aren't all that important in this, except to get clear in your mind what's occurring. Then the next question is, as a result of your resentment, was a harm done to your relationship with Terry or to her directly? And I should
besides the fact that I was a drug addict and wasn't there for her, or after I got sober after she moved back?
We're talking about just the resentment now.
So
is that causing her a harm? And it's an important point. Not every character defect causes a harm. The harm has to be something that actually hurts someone in a meaningful way. That doesn't mean that Terry isn't, she might not be completely happy about the way you feel about what she's done, but that's not a harm. That's part of living in the world too. But it could be, you know, so only you know what your actions are and if they actually caused a harm.
So I've made amends to her about the drug addiction stuff, about the behavior that came along with that. As far as me having this undercurrent resentment about her bringing our son Torrent back to the East Coast, does that cause her harm? I can't see that clearly because I still try to be compassionate towards her and have an open relationship with her. So I can't see if that, I don't think it does.
That's a great point. And if you don't think it does, you've developed a good measure of honesty. You're not kidding yourself anymore. If it's not there, it's not there. And it makes a very important point. Just because you have a resentment doesn't necessarily mean you've caused a harm. If you had, and you could identify the harm, that would be the next question. What is the harm? And then you would put across that, and I'll show you when we get to it. And that's the beginning of your 8-step amends list. You know what harm has been done. So you know that you have a resentment with Terry. You move on to the next. Is there any fear in your relationship with Terry?
Yes.
And what's the nature of the fear?
The nature of the fear is she was a very heavy drinker. In my eyes, she definitely has this allergy. And she stopped drinking when she got pregnant. And my fear is that I see her 2.5 years later after our son was born, that she's a dry drunk and that she might drink anytime now. She's really unhappy and she's really stuck in her life and she's not seeking any kind of transformation with it.
So fear is finding, the best description of fear is finding fault with the future. So, and again, I'm not trying to talk you out of that, but there has to be some reasonableness there too.
So I fear she's going to start drinking again.
Okay.
Because she has no solution to not except obsessing about being a mom.
Has that fear caused a harm to Terry?
No.
Okay, then move on. To selfishness. Is there any selfishness with your relationship with Terry or directly towards her? So selfishness, if you look at the definition of the terms, is putting your own needs above her needs.
No.
And just to make a point, if I know that you're acting in a selfish way, I'm acting as your sponsor now.
Right.
And I happen to know that you're very selfish with Terry, but I'm taking you through an inventory and you say there's no selfishness. Right. It's not for me to say, wait a minute, what about this? What about that? Right. Even and I'm saying this to you when you're taking sponsees through the steps. If they say something like that, you know it's not true, it simply means they're just not ready to deal with it. And it's enough that they're going through the process. You just move on. You don't make anything up about it.
Okay.
So the next is dishonesty. Is there any dishonesty with you, Terry? No. Any pride or false pride. So pride is feeling better than her. False pride is in a kind of condescending, self-condescending way, self-effacing way, that I'm worse than you. I'm not near.
I fall into that pride with her sometimes.
And how does that pride manifest?
It manifests, I've made this transformation in my life. I'm in recovery. I'm not just being abstinent. I'm not miserable. There's incredible things happening in my life. I feel superior to her because of that sometimes when I don't keep that in check.
Yeah, that's really good insight. Has your pride caused a harm to Terry?
I don't believe so.
And again, just to make the point, I could know that, yes, you did hurt her because of your pride, but you're not ready to see it yet. You just move on. Right. Jealousy and envy are things that people get mixed up. Jealousy is more of a suspiciousness and envy is more of a bitterness over someone's gain or who they are. So is there any jealousy in your relationship with Terry?
No.
Is there any envy?
There is envy about the fact that she gets to spend so much time with our son.
That's a perfect example of envy. And has that envy or bitterness caused a harm to Terry or the relationship?
No.
Again, move on. Laziness or procrastination. Is there any laziness, things that you should be doing for Terry or for the relationship that you're not doing?
No.
Okay. So you've just completed the inventory list as it's described in the big book for Terry. It didn't take endless writing. You didn't get lost in the details, and you know very, very clearly what self-centered characteristics come up in your relationship with Terry.
Yeah.
And that is your part in that relationship, and that's the only part that you can change now. If you got into a written story about all the things that happened between you and Terry and how that's resulted in your relationship today, you'd still be left with just a simple list. All the details don't matter. What's important is you understand your self-centered behavior. And that's current. That's today. The only thing you can deal with. So you move on to Casey. Is there any resentment in the relationship with Casey? And what's the nature of that?
The nature of that is Casey's my really good friend. He married my sister. He's an addict. He's been trying to get clean. He hasn't. There's a lot of lies there in that relationship with my sister. I'm resentful towards him because of those lies.
Yeah. Has that resentment caused a harm to Casey or to your relationship with him?
Yeah.
Okay, so notice that you've got a check there to recognize the resentment, and a harm has been done, so you crossed the check.
Yeah.
That's your 8-step list that you're creating now.
I will say with that too, beyond his relationship with my sister, I miss my old best friend.
Yeah, I mean, that's a clear part of addiction, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Even if people are in the same room sitting across the table from you, if they're using, they're not there.
Right.
It's painful. Any fear in your relationship with Casey?
Yeah, there's a lot of fear there.
What's the nature of that? How does it manifest?
The nature of that is I think about their kids that they have and how that's affecting the kids. Mm-hmm. I think about how that it affects my sister and what the future is going to be like for them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of fear there.
Has that fear caused a harm to Casey?
In a way that I would say that I avoid Casey, but I've talked to him about this so many times that I've addressed this fear with him, and it just hasn't changed. That I don't think it's harming him today.
That's an important distinction to make, Casey, too, because you're seeing the situation clearly. It's not something that you're actively doing that's causing the harm. It really is the situation and his addiction that's causing the harm in the relationship, not your response to it. So it's good to see it that way. Right. Any selfishness in your relationship with Casey?
Yeah, there is.
And how does that manifest?
That manifests me wanting him to figure this out right now, figure out his addiction stuff right now, and wanting him to see the light right now.
Has that caused a harm?
Well, the thing with that is I go into that and then I'll back away and realize, the truth is this is going to happen in his own timing and it may never happen.
It may never happen.
But I know I do fall into that selfish, self-centered thing of like, why can't, if I did it, why can't you do it now?
Has it caused a harm, though?
Has it caused the harm?
And I would say, Toph, if you have to really look for it, it's probably not there. We know when we've hurt people.
Yeah, and I've made amends to him, and we talk about this openly, and then we both turn away from it, and we'll talk about it again as time goes by. So it's open and it's real. Yeah,
it doesn't sound like any harm is done. Again, we're not responsible for reasonable responses to other people's actions. That's not, that's not a harm. That's living in the world. Any dishonesty with Casey?
No.
Pride or false pride?
There's some pride there too. The same as before with Tare. Like, I feel like I've realized something more than he has because I've gone on this really challenging journey in recovery. And sometimes when I'm talking to him, I'll feel like I'm like talking to somebody who hasn't done that, doesn't know the truth about that yet, and that makes me feel superior sometimes. And at the same time too, I can feel like just on this, on the same exact level with my old friend who just hasn't made that transformation yet.
Yeah. Has it caused a harm?
No, because we talk about it inside out a lot. We talk about that.
No. Any jealousy or suspiciousness with Casey?
No.
Envy?
Nope.
Laziness? Procrastination?
No.
All right. So you just completed the inventory on your self-centered characteristics that come up with Casey and Terry. Good for you. Very simple and direct.
Yeah.
Do you see why this is set out this way? Again, if the problem is identified as self-centeredness, that's the root of our trouble, then an inventory is to get to that root, to see what our actions are. Again, all the details surrounding it is just get you bogged down in the details and you don't see this clearly.
Right.
With your mom, is there any resentment with your mom?
There is.
And what's the nature of that?
She's a late-stage alcoholic, and it just infects every part of her perception and existence, and it's really challenging to connect with her.
Yeah. Has your resentment caused a harm to your mom or to the relationship?
Sometimes it has, because I'll be compassionate with her, and then I'll get to a place where I'm just so frustrated that I just explode sometimes with her.
So again, there's your 8-step amends list.
Yeah.
We'll talk about this when
Yeah.
but you'll be making amends to your mom based on that resentment. Is there any fear in relationship with your mom?
Yeah, I fear that she, the other night, December 23rd, I came home and she was passed out. And there was like a lamp on top of her, and she didn't know where she was. And, me and my sister live on the West Coast. She's here on the East Coast. We're scared that she's, kind of fall, hit her head, break a hip, something, she's getting old.
Let's talk about this later.
Yeah.
Has your fear caused her harm?
No.
Yeah, it's a reasonable fear too, by the way.
Right.
This really, when you get into these things, that's a natural and normal fear to have about your mom. Yeah. It's when you're losing sleep over it, or every time you think of your mom, you think of that she might fall and hit her head.
Right.
That's something that now we're getting, our thoughts are getting away from us. Right. And only you know how, but how do you stop that when it's your mom?
Well, and she's been this way her whole life too. So,
yeah. Anyway, so you've identified that there's a fear there, and that's the important thing right now.
Yeah.
Again, this is a 4-step inventory. Looking at your self-centered characteristics. The inventory process itself is not trying to solve all the problems with other people. Right. It's just to get a look at what's going on with you. Any selfishness in relationship with your mom?
No.
Any dishonesty?
Nope.
Pride or false pride?
There's that same pride there.
So let me just ask you, Toph, is that simply a recognition that you've sobered up and someone else hasn't, or is it really a feeling of superiority that you've sobered up?
I think it's both those.
Okay. Now, again,
I think that's fluid because it's a new thing.
Yeah.
And I think that gets into my ego sometimes, and I'm like, well, why can't you do this?
Oh, I know. It took me a while, 3 or 4, even 5 years later, and it still is occurring now, 30 some odd years later. I'd see my dad and he'd say, I'm so proud that you're not drinking. I'm so proud you're not drinking. I think, thanks, but I did it because I had to do it.
Right.
And I understand it coming from a parent, from my dad, but I don't drink today because I can't drink today. Right. It's not even a choice, but it takes a while to get there too. Any jealousy with your mom?
No.
Envy?
No.
Or laziness?
So the laziness, there might be a little there because we would like to help my mom in a way. So we're actively seeking out like what might be the best way, most effective way to have an intervention with her. Has there been some laziness around that? Maybe it just hasn't been appropriate yet for us to like have the knowledge and the capacity to bring that to the table with her.
The important question then is, are there things that you could do that you're not doing?
No, we're actively doing them.
Yeah. So I don't see any laziness there.
Okay.
With Jesse, any resentment with Jesse?
There is resentment there. He's one of my best friends I used to party the hardest with. So the resentment there,
What's the nature of it?
The nature of it is he hurts a lot of people. Just like I did when I was like that.
And you are maintaining a hostile or indignant attitude because of that?
Sometimes.
Okay. Has your resentment caused a harm to Jesse?
No.
So again, just as teaching you how to do this, the details of all of that thing with Jesse aren't important. What's most important is that you have a resentment, and that's what affects you. No harm was done. You move on to fear. Any fear in your relationship with Jesse?
No.
Any selfishness?
I guess the selfishness is there. Same thing with Case. Like, I miss my old friend, and I want him to get this and understand this and have real presence in his life again.
Yeah. So what this is touching on, it's getting a little bit out of the 12 steps, but touching on mindfulness-based recovery, what you're also seeing here is the impermanence of relationships, the impermanence of all things. Things change. And you were you instigated a change by your sobriety.
Right.
You had to do it.
Right. I had to do it.
You had to do it. Has your selfishness caused a harm to Jesse?
No.
Any dishonesty with Jesse?
No.
Pride or false pride?
That same pride's there.
It's really good that you recognize that. Has your pride caused a harm to Jesse?
No.
Any jealousy?
No.
Envy?
No.
Laziness?
No.
Okay. With Blackty, any resentment?
No.
Any fear?
No.
Selfishness?
Yes.
What's the nature of the selfishness?
This is an old cocaine dealer that I ended up taking a lot of money from.
That yet to be repaid?
Yeah, it's about $7,000.
Okay, so a harm has been done to Blackty?
Yeah.
We can talk about this later on too, if you want.
Yeah.
Any dishonesty along the same lines?
Yeah. I haven't talked to him since I got sober.
And that dishonesty is part of the same harm?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Any pride or false pride?
Yeah. Pride there too, same stuff.
Has it caused him a harm?
Yeah. Because I haven't paid him back because I feel, I have this excuse in my mind that he's just going to spend it on more blow, which he will, but that's still not my business.
That is an excuse, though. I mean, you see it. Any jealousy with Blackty?
No.
Any envy?
No.
Laziness?
Laziness that I haven't connected with him to take care of this.
And the same harm?
Yeah. And actually, I will say there's fear there because he lives in Ashland and his house is like a little cocaine lair. And he doesn't have a phone number that I know of or could get. So I'd have to go there to do this.
Well, it brings up, again, let's talk about this when we get to step 9, but that's an interesting thing. We're not to put ourselves in harm's way to make an amends either. That's just foolish. So, again, we can talk about other things that you could do with it.
Yeah.
And that fear is part of the same harm?
Yeah. And there is one more name I'd like to put up here. Her name's Kristen.
Kay?
Kay, yeah. This is the reason why this is on here is this is my first love. And we've been talking a little bit again since I've been back here this holiday trip. And this is the girl, she broke my heart. She's my high school sweetheart. She broke my heart. And it just, connecting with her again brings up some stuff.
Well, let's run it. Is there any resentment with Kristen?
Yeah.
What's the nature of the resentment?
That she left me.
Has that resentment, and so you're still holding a hostile or indignant or contemptuous attitude towards her?
I didn't think it was, but after we've been connecting again a little bit, yeah, I mean.
It's good to recognize it. Has it caused her a harm or the relationship a harm?
No.
Any fear with Kristen?
Yeah, there's some fear there.
What's the nature of the fear?
I don't know, that there's still like feelings there, and I'm like, I don't know. That we've been connecting a little bit, and maybe we want to see each other again, kind of thing, and I don't know.
Has the fear caused her a harm in the relationship?
No.
Any selfishness with Kristen?
There's got to be selfishness there.
Well, can you identify? What's the nature of it? It's important to see that. Maybe there isn't.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's the selfishness there of like, this is the girl that broke my heart back when I was a kid, and there's a part of me that still wants her to just absolutely love me.
Has that selfishness caused the harm?
No.
Any dishonesty?
No.
Pride or false pride?
No.
Jealousy?
No.
Envy?
No.
Laziness?
No.
That's good. I'm glad you ran that. So
Yeah,
you see what's going on clearly.
Yeah.
And these are all, if anything is going to develop, these are all hindrances to that development. Good for you. A higher power. Many people blame whatever their idea of a higher power is for their situation, for being a drug addict or an alcoholic. It might be that they lost a loved one, they blame God for that, or who got the presidential election. If we're holding resentments against a higher power, there's no way we're going to seek that higher power's assistance. So bearing that in mind, do you have a resentment against your idea of a higher power?
No.
Is there anything in here that relates to your higher power? And I would point out laziness, and that would be, are there things that you could be doing for yourself in a spiritual, in quotations, that you're not doing?
I would say, yeah, definitely laziness hits that one on the head recently. After going back to school this fall, my practice has dropped off a little bit for sure. I haven't been doing what I did for the whole first 2 years of this writing.
It's good to recognize that. The other thing that it's possible to be fearful. In fact, I was taught when I was in Roman in Catholic school that I should be fearful of God.
I don't have that.
Yeah, and then, again, it's just to go through it.
Yeah.
Dishonesty. Many people think that they can. You believe in a supreme being, but you think you can somehow hide things from that supreme being.
Right.
Do you have that belief?
No.
And it's important just
Absolutely
to point that
not.
out. Pride or false pride. If you got that with if you believe in a higher power, but you think you're better than that higher power, you're a little confused. So yeah. And the same thing, suspiciousness or envy don't really apply. Now, getting down to self. Many people today in AA are taught that you should never even consider yourself in a 4-step inventory. Really, self should be at the top of the list, and I do in the mindfulness-based recovery inventory. Self is the first thing you should look at. And even the big book says that resentment towards oneself is remorse. And it's so important. If we're wallowing in remorse and self-pity, we're going to have a hard time establishing our sobriety, so we need to look at that. Is there any resentment or remorse towards yourself?
There's not today.
But there was.
There was in the beginning. There was tremendous amounts of that.
So let me ask you this: did you ever make an amends towards yourself as part of this?
I
know
have.
we went through the steps.
Yeah,
so you did.
I have.
That's one of the reasons why it should be here, because the most important person we can make an amends to is to ourselves. Is there anything else in that list of self that should be marked?
I mean, I would say there's some fear there, where there's still the question of like, who am I? If what I'm going to find out in this recovery process, the unknown of that scares me.
It's great to recognize that. Dishonesty could apply.
Right.
As addicts and alcoholics, we have to BS ourselves to keep going.
Right.
Is there any of that now? To a substantial, it doesn't mean.
No, there's not, because I've been talking about all of that with my closest recovery friends and sponsor, and all of it.
The only other thing that would apply is laziness. Again, are there things that you could be doing for yourself in a reasonable way that you're not doing? You could say, well, I can do 100 push-ups every day, but that's not really what we're talking about.
My self-care is pretty good. I will say, my practice could be a little stronger these days for sure. So let's put down laziness.
Has that laziness caused you a harm, though, an actual harm?
It's made me feel not as connected and present of late. So yeah, it has.
It's good to point that out. So there's an amends you'll be making to yourself.
Yeah.
And again, we'll talk about that. Many people that have come to AA and failed, even though the modern structure of AA kind of encourages failure, they still blame AA. And since we need to go to AA to find other people to help, if you have a resentment, you need to look at it and get over it. So do you have any resentment against AA?
No.
Any of these other things? Especially laziness?
No.
Okay. So if you look at the bottom of the list, these are our assets. You can call them God's will. You can call them behavioral assets. So these are the things beginning with, if you find yourself in resentment, you want to strive for forgiveness in that moment. The same thing for if you're in fear, you need to strive for faith and love. If you're selfish, you need to strive for unselfishness. Again, these are things to look for. So when you're doing a 10-step inventory, and you find that resentment is on the list, you know that immediately you need to strive for forgiveness in that situation. In laziness, if you find laziness is occurring, you need to take action. And it's a very specific and well-described process. So congratulations on taking a very thorough fourth step. If you notice that we've also been discussing this, so you've discussed it with your sponsor, meaning me in this case.
Yeah.
That's your fifth step. And if you believe in a supreme creator God, that supreme creator God must be listening. And so you've completed the fifth step also. Congratulations. I want to point out that we've been going for even a little bit less than an hour. It's 12 o'clock now. Okay. And you've taken the first 5 steps as are described in the big book. And can you think of any other way to create a longer, drawn-out process of doing this? And that's kind of a rhetorical question. There really isn't. If you look at the 12 steps are designed to give you a foundation for developing recovery, the quicker, more concise, more direct way is the most effective way. And that's what they found early on. I always give this story. This is how Ebby took Bill through the 12 steps. They weren't really called the 12 steps. It was just a conversation. Yeah. When they put it in big book form, when Bill did, he decided to break it down in this way, 12 separate discrete steps. When he took Dr. Bob through the steps, he did exactly the same thing. He met Dr. Bob. If you remember the story, Bill was in Akron on business, and he happened to walk by the hotel bar that he was staying at, and he heard everybody having a good time, and the glass is tinkling. And he had this feeling that I need to have a drink. I'm going in there. And the only thing he could think of was to find someone else to help if he was going to stay sober that day. And he got on the phone, and he made 19 phone calls. The last phone call was to Henrietta Siebelin. And he told her his problem, and he needs to find someone to help. Do you know of someone? And she says, I got just a candidate. Let me see if I can get a hold of him. And she called Dr. Bob. And Dr. Bob was already in his cups. He was already drunk. Middle of the afternoon. And he says, I can't see the guy. Maybe I'll see him tomorrow. And he hung up. Henrietta called Bill back and said, well, I got this guy, but he's already drunk. He said, maybe he'll see you tomorrow. And that was enough to get Bill through that day. He stayed sober that day. The next day he called Dr. Bob, or he called Henrietta. Henrietta called Dr. Bob. Bob said, I'll give the bum 5 minutes. And they talked for 8 hours. He gave Bill, Dr. Bob was still drinking even at that point because he was so shaky. He just wasn't going at it. Bill took Dr. Bob through the steps. Dr. Bob got it. Unfortunately, about 2 weeks later, Dr. Bob went on a business trip to Atlantic City, of all places, and he drank again. And he barely made it back to Akron. But Bill was still there on business. When Bob got back, Bill took him through the steps again. Around midnight that night, he gave Dr. Bob his last beer just to calm his nerves enough to get through the night. The next day, Dr. Bob, this is recounted in his story, the next day, Dr. Bob went out and made all his amends in one day, immediately, early in recovery, still shivering and shaking. Dr. Bob died sober 15 years later. Yeah. During that period of 15 years, he took over 5,000 men and women through the steps. And if you do the math, there's no way that he took any more than a couple hours to take people through the steps. And his process was, it was either in his office at work, or he brought people over to his home. He cleared his daughter out of the upstairs bedroom. They sat down and went through the steps in an hour and a half, just like we're doing here. And most of those people stayed sober. And because of that process, AA is still here today. If it wasn't for that, if they got into this long, complicated, detailed way of going through the steps, we wouldn't even have known of AA. But during that time when people were going through the steps in this simple and direct way, AA grew exponentially. It was in the mid to late 60s when things started to change. We had the influence of rehabs and more of a psychological approach of going through the steps. And that's when the recovery rate started to plummet. The most telling statistic to me of all that, and I'm saying this also for the camera today because this is going to be on the website. To me, the most telling statistics is towards the end of the 1960s, there was about 2 million people in AA worldwide. 40 some odd years later, I can't even do the math in my head, 50 something, maybe even longer. There's still 2 million people in AA, meaning that AA hasn't grown at all in all that time. And the reason is we've gotten away from the simple and direct way. And these are not my statistics. These are AA statistics, and they're still available. So you've taken the first 5 steps. We're getting on to the 6th step. Do you have any questions about what we've done so far?
No, clear on this so far.
And again, the rest of the steps are just as simple and direct. Step 6 in the big book is really 2 paragraphs, and it says, are we now ready to let God or a higher power remove from us all the things that we have admitted are objectionable? And that simple question is, in step 6, this is one of those things that drive me crazy at an AA meeting when I hear somebody say, I'm on my 6th step, I've been working on it for 4 months. It's simply a question and an answer. It's an acknowledgement of where you are in this process. So Tope, are you now ready to let your higher power remove from you all the things that you have admitted are objectionable?
Yes.
Congratulations on taking the 6th step. So many people get hung up on this. Well, maybe I'm not ready. Well, my sponsor, I still remember this back in 1981. He was this big, giant guy, Bob. I don't say his last name, but he's long dead. He asked me this question, and he put up his hand, and he said, don't answer that question. Let me say this. If you're not ready, when, and he used the word, when the F will you be ready? Yeah. And I thought a minute, well, yeah, I guess I am ready. I'm not in 100%. But I'm ready to have the higher power remove these character defects that I've just identified. And I also understood the process. It wasn't like I have to change my entire being. I know that there's things about my behavior that I have to change. And I now, at this point, believe that with the aid of a higher power, I can change those behaviors. And that's all that step 6 is asking. Are you ready to do that? Congratulations on doing that. Step 7, the way it's put up on the wall, is humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. It's a simple declaration of what we're doing in step 7. And step 7, again, is a prayer in the big book, but it can also be a simple question of a sponsor asking the sponsee, is it your intention that your higher power assist you in minimizing your defects of character?
Yes.
Would you like to say the prayer too?
I would.
Okay, so let's say, do you know this one?
I know this one.
Wait, I couldn't remember. So when ready, this is that the big book states exactly what step 7 is. When ready, we say something like this. My creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. And then it says very clearly in the big book, we have now completed step 7. Does not direct us to do any kind of writing or examination. You're simply stating that, yes, I want a higher power to continue the process of recovery. Yeah. Congratulations on taking step 7. I hope this is coming out. It looks pretty dark, but it'll be a recording that you can relate to. Step 8 says, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And then it says in the text, we have a list of persons we have harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. That's the check on here. There's nothing else that we need to do. Again, many people now start creating a harms list. Right. Well, you have a harms list. It's right here. What do you do with a harms list? It says, so congratulations on making the list, step 8. And step 9 directs us to make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So whenever possible, it's a very narrow definition. It's very rare that making an amends is going to cause a harm to someone. But with the aid of a sponsor, you should be able to determine what that is. And a good example might be that you were cheating on a partner and your current partner doesn't know about that. There's no reason to let them know. It's only going to cause them harm. The most important thing is to recognize that behavior and to change the behavior. Right. And that's just one example. Another example might be something that would get someone else in trouble. Like you might have knowledge of a crime that you were involved with and a friend of yours or an acquaintance. Right. And if you admit to the crime, they're going to be hurt. You have to think about that. It's not right that we unburden ourselves and create a burden for someone else. But in most cases, you make direct amends and they're going to be well accepted, or at least they're going to get to the point of freeing you of that behavior. So the question is, will you begin to make amends this coming week?
Yes.
Congratulations on committing this take step 9. Now, what I would do is once I understand what my sponsee is dealing with, and if those amends can be reasonably made within a week, I ask them to commit to within a week. Okay. Now, if there's Financial amends like you have. Most of us, when we come into the program, we're dead broke. We don't have a lot of money.
Right.
And if we have a lot of financial amends or property amends, we're not going to be able to make them within a week. So we set up a plan. And it's a plan that we can live with, that is not rooted in selfishness. In other words, I owe somebody $20, I'm going to give them $1 a year. That's selfish. I owe somebody $20. How long is it going to take me to get up $20 and pay them? And that's what determines it. So you mentioned you owe somebody $7 grand from drug activity.
Yeah.
Can you reasonably expect, how long would it take you to reasonably pay off that money? That's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
Can you reasonably expect to pay it off in your lifetime?
Yeah.
How long do you think? Just put a date on it.
I mean, I would say where I'm at in my life, coming full circle, making legal money, paying for my kids.
Yeah, all those are important.
So to pay him back, I would say I could do it in 10 years.
Now, are you comfortable contacting him if you can? I know you said
So there's no way to contact him through a phone because none of my friends know his phone number. So I'd have to go to his house.
What about sending a letter?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So what about sending him a letter saying, I understand what I've done? Well, let me ask you this, though. Are you putting yourself in harm's way by letting him know how to get a hold of you?
I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't trust him.
So what about this? Just a suggestion. And there's nothing wrong with reasonably protecting yourself, too, against someone who might do you harm. Can you do it in a way that he won't know how to get a hold of you? And you'll just make a commitment to say, once a month, I'm going to send you what I can. I expect it to be this, and over the period of 10 years.
I could do that.
Okay, so that's what you'll do as that amends. And these other amends that you've listed, you'll make an amends to Casey based on resentment. So what that means is now you know why you need to make an amends, and you know what you're talking about. So you go to Casey and you say, I've just done an inventory.
Yeah.
I've identified that I have a resentment against you. Excuse me. And that resentment has caused you harm. I want you to know that I'm doing everything I can right now in my life so that I won't recreate that resentment or that pattern of behavior that caused you harm. And that's it, whether it's received or not. But that opens the door, and it gets you completely focused on the cause of your hurt. In other words, you're not just going to say, Casey, I think I hurt you, let's get over it.
Right.
You can actually talk about your own behavior. And the same is true with your mom and the resentment. You'll talk to her and say exactly the same thing. And with black tea, it's basically the same thing. We just talked about that.
Right.
You'll make that amends. And the most important amends is to yourself. And what I suggest is that you do something. We talked about this when we first went through the steps. Do something for yourself that you wouldn't normally do, but with the understanding that I'm doing this to make an amends to myself. And that's such a freeing thing to do. You start learning in a very direct way to treat yourself gently and with kindness. So you'll do all these things that we talked about as part of step 9.
Within the next week.
Great. Congratulations. This is how it works.
John, thanks.
We're not done yet. On to step 10.
Yep.
Step 10 says continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. So it's telling you that I'm not finding a spot. On page 84, paragraph 2, this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. So in a very real way, step 10 it's kind of a synopsis of the previous steps. And it says we continue to take a personal inventory. How did we do that? We did it with this 4-step inventory. So it's implying to use the same list, the same inventory list. And these are available for the camera. These are available on the website for free download. And I suggest you download it and use it as part of your daily practice. And we'll get into step 11 in just a minute. But part of your meditation practice, the big book that guides us to do this, to do a quick inventory, and then do that as part of your meditation. And that's the most effective way of keeping our self-centered behaviors in check, by simply writing a simple checklist down on a daily basis. And honestly, after a short while, if you're dealing with someone new, I would suggest that they do it at least for a month on a daily basis. But at some point, you get to be able to do this in your head, very quickly. But even now, many, many years later, if I'm really caught up in a situation, I'll get the inventory out and I'll write it out. it helps so much to become clear. So step 10, you'll commit to step 10, Tove.
Yep.
Will you continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as you go along?
Yes.
Congratulations on committing to take step 10. Just that simple. Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So step 11 asks, will you pray and meditate daily?
Yes.
Congratulations on committing to take step 11. So again, remember that to me, a prayer is stating our strong intention that something happened. And the most important intention that I've ever, meaning the most important prayer, is that my higher power, however I see that, provide the ongoing means for me to maintain my sobriety. And what that means is to provide me the opportunity to find other alcoholics to help. That's why I go to AA meetings today. It's the only reason. I do not go to, Bob told me many years ago, he said, I never want to hear you bring up a problem at AA meeting. You've got a problem, you come to me. When you go to an AA meeting, you find someone to help. And you do that at every meeting. It doesn't mean you'll find someone at every meeting, but that's the focus. And that was the best advice I ever got from Bob, and it kept me sober. Even back then, now I was 6 months in when I took the steps back then, and even back then there was this big, resistance to anybody with less than a year, sometimes 2 or 5 or 10 years, seeking to take other people through the steps. You're just not ready. Well, if you remember that Bill Wilson took the steps, and that day he left looking for other people to help. It's the biggest lie in AA that we're not ready to take people through the steps as soon as we go through the steps. And we should go through the steps as soon as we come to AA. And that's how we establish our sobriety. Nothing so ensures immunity from drinking, but intensive work with other alcoholics. And I certainly need that when I got 1, 2, or 3 or 4 days sober. Yeah. I need to know how to do that. And despite the resistance in AA, a good sponsor will guide you. So one of the things that I do, and I think I offered it to you too, I take someone through the steps, and then I offer to sit there when they start working with others the first few times. And that gives the newcomer the confidence to do it, just like we're doing now. Yeah. That's the most important thing you can give to your sponsee, is that understanding and the confidence to do this themselves. And anybody can do this. That's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, is a newcomer can take the book and just read out of it, and you know how to take people through the steps. So you're on step 11. So let's do a quick meditation, just so it's on the air, and it's good for us to do it anyway. So you know that I teach shamatha vipassana meditation. That means to quiet the mind. Shamatha means to quiet the mind, and vipassana means to gain insight. And in this sense, that insight is a very specific insight into our self-centered character defects. And as we develop a meditation practice which deepens our concentration, we're able to see these things much more clearly, especially with the assistance of an inventory process. So gently close your eyes and gently close your mouth, and take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. And holding your back straight but not stiff, your ears aligned with your shoulders and nose aligned with your navel, but holding yourself very loosely, very gently, very lovingly. Allow yourself to settle into this room, settle onto your seat, settle into your body, and settle into your mind. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. Just get a feel for what that's like, to be mindful of your breath in your body. And while remaining mindful of your breath in your body, notice that thoughts are flowing. We're conscious beings, thoughts should be flowing. The purpose of shamatha vipassana meditation is to not be distracted by your own thoughts. So when you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. I'll repeat that. When you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. And we'll meditate for just a few minutes. relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Take a moment to notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with your mind. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. So I know you have a lot of experience in this, but that's the basic meditation practice. There's a recording of this on crossrivermeditation.com and additional instruction too there. So that's step 11. We're on to step 12 already.
Thank you, John.
Congratulations. So step 12 states having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, which means that whether you're aware of it or not, you've had a spiritual awakening. And at the very least, a spiritual awakening means that we're starting to incline our thoughts towards something greater than our ego self. And the simple recognition that I have self-centered characteristics that I can address and diminish and ultimately get rid of completely is the essence of a spiritual awakening, isn't it? And so you've had that. Again, there's nothing magical or mystical. There's nothing to wait for, certainly. There's nothing that needs to be developed at this point. But of course, as you continue to develop the principles that are presented here in the 12 steps, you will grow spiritually. Then it continues, we tried to carry this message to other alcoholics. That word in there, tried, is so important because we can get very frustrated by complete failure. Now remember, when Bill first started doing this work, there's a scene in that movie, Bill W., where he comes home and he's obviously upset, and Lois says to Bill, "What's the matter, Bill?" And Bill said, "I've been out there for 6 months. I've taken hundreds of people through the steps and nobody's staying sober." And Lois said, "Yeah, Bill, but you are." And that's when it hit him like a ton of bricks. For the first time in his life, he understood that it was in that process of looking to help others that enabled him to stay sober for 6 months, which was the longest period of sobriety he had in his entire adult life. And again, by continuing to do that work, Bill died sober too. I think it was 1972 when he passed. Always looking to help another alcoholic, never ever concerned about his problems of the day. And that's what most of the early members did. They weren't told to bring their problems to a meeting and talk endlessly about what's wrong and the cat peed on the rug and I feel like taking a drink. They were told to address your problems through the inventory process and through prayer and meditation and service to others. And it concludes with, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. What are the principles? The principles are basically self-honesty and a connection to a power greater than ourselves in a mindful way, meaning to hold that in mind. And how do we do that? Through meditation and an inventory process and service to others. The most selfless thing we can do is to find someone in need of what we know and to take the time, it's not that much time, take them through the steps and get them heading in the right direction. The other aspect of sponsorship, and there's a chapter in here on sponsorship, is our primary role as a sponsor is not as a counselor, meaning that we're here to solve our sponsees every one of their problems. In fact, that's greatly overstepping and complicating the role of a sponsor. A sponsor's role is to take their sponsee through the steps as soon as possible, because that gives them the greatest opportunity to establish their own sobriety and then to keep them focused. And if as sponsors, and this is an important relationship, if as sponsors we start getting into other things, we're getting into an area where we're diminishing our role as a sponsor. We may be becoming a friend to someone, but we've got to be very careful we're not losing our role as a sponsor, because what's more important to our sponsee? It's not a new friend. There's plenty of friends out there. It's an understanding and well-focused sponsor. So once we've taken our sponsees through the steps, our primary role is to keep them focused on the recovery through the steps and supporting them taking others through the steps. That's it. And that doesn't mean it's friendships that don't develop. We've developed a wonderful friendship, and I'm so glad we have one. but it also hasn't clouded, and I'm not your sponsor either, it hasn't clouded our relationship. Many of my sponsees I've created a friendship out of, but I've always kept a certain distance that I think even they felt, because I know that as much as I'd like more of a friendship, it was more important for me that I be their sponsor. Yeah. Now, after a certain point, that relationship is not so important. And so, it might take a few years for that to develop. It might just take a couple of months. But I know when I get that phone call from a sponsee, that first phone call, it says, hey, I got someone that wants to go through the steps with me. I know that I've now done everything I can to establish their sobriety. And then the only thing to do at that point is to support them in working with others. And that's really, so I have sponsees that have years of sobriety. And when they call me, and it's not that often, and it shouldn't be, when they call me, the question usually has to do with how they're working with others. And sometimes it's just to say hello. But if I'm getting a call from a sponsee 2 years in, and they're still talking about their problems, and they're still talking about their fears, what I do is I say, we need to go through the steps again, because you're relying too much on me and not enough on developing your own sense of sobriety. So that's an important point to make. We're not here to it always kills me that people, when they talk at meetings, how many sponsees they have or that type of thing. We're not here to gain sponsees. We're here to help people sober up. And honestly, I don't know how many people I sponsor, because I don't care. When somebody asks me to take them through the steps, I take them through the steps and I guide their recovery. So the last thing I'm going to say, and it's important to read this. This is Dr. Bob's, if I could find it. Well, let me ask you the 12-step question, then I want to close with Dr. Bob's words. Toph, will you carry this message to other alcoholics and practice these principles in all your affairs?
Yes.
Congratulations on taking all 12 steps again today.
Thank you.
We spent a little over 72 minutes doing this. Again, I'll ask you the question, can you think of any reason to stretch this out or make it more complicated? No. Yeah, this gets right to the heart of the matter, and it supports our sponsees in the most important way, what they can do on their own. So the last thing I want to say, we'll close this. These are Dr. Bob's words. He gave this at a convention about 2 weeks before he died, and he knew he was going to die. Up until this point, him and Bill had an incredible relationship. But one of the things that Dr. Bob and Bill kind of fought about was Bill was always looking for other methods and even more complicated ways of taking the steps. When Bill wrote the 12 and 12, which was never meant to be instructions for taking the steps. He actually wrote it because he needed money. He was dead broke. And it really, his impressions on the steps in general, it really essays on the steps instead of instructions on how to take the steps. But Dr. Bob was concerned about that people would take it as instruction. And one of the things that he kept saying to Bill, please keep it simple. Keep it simple. This is a simple program. Don't complicate it. And at that same time, Dr. Bob wrote a little booklet describing how to take the 12 steps. It's a little tiny little booklet. It's still available through Akron AA. I can't remember how many, I think it's like 8 pages long, but it was written in response to the 12 and 12, just because he was concerned about this making it much more difficult than it needed to be. So this was his speech. But there are 2 or 3 things that flashed into my mind on which it would be fitting to lay a little emphasis. One is the simplicity of our program. Let's not louse it all up with Freudian complexes and things that are interesting to the scientific mind, but have very little to do with our actual AA work. Our 12 steps, when simmered down to the last, resolve themselves into the words love and service. We understand what love is, and we understand what service is. So let's bear those 2 things in mind. Of course, service, he's talking about sitting down and taking people through the 12 steps. Let's also remember to guard that erring member of the tongue, and if we must use it, let's use it with kindness and consideration and tolerance. And think about all those people that are intolerant of people just want to take the steps in a simple and direct way, or that want to incorporate a higher power into their program and say that's not appropriate here, or you're not ready for it. And one more thing, none of us would be here today if somebody hadn't taken the time to explain things to us, to give us a little pat on the back, to take us to a meeting or two, to have done numerous little kind and thoughtful acts on our behalf. So let us never get the degree of smug complacency so that we're not willing to extend or attempt to that help which has been so beneficial to us, to our less fortunate brothers. Thank you very much. And Bill died, Dr. Bob died a couple weeks after that. So I'm going to close this with what with my sponsor Bob told me. With deep gratitude to the spiritual solution to our drinking problem, we have been given the gift of life. More importantly, we have been given the gift of life with a purpose. That purpose is to serve others. Use it wisely. Stay sober, take the steps, take another alcoholic through the steps. Congratulations.
John, thank you.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I'm glad we got this on tape. I hope it can be seen. You know what I want to do before well, let me close this. I want to take a picture of the board because I'm going to have to put that up. Yeah, I'll post this to it, so you'll be